I'm Eleanor, 70 years old. I never thought my son William would hurt me so deeply until that fateful family dinner last month. The table went silent when he suddenly shouted those words that cut through my heart. "Shut up, widow. You don't understand what real families need anymore." I sat there, stunned and humiliated. The next morning I packed a suitcase, wrote a letter, and made a decision that would change everything between us forever. Before I share what happened next, tell me where you're watching from today. Hit that subscribe button and join me as I reveal how my son learned the hardest lesson about taking family for granted. I spent 40 years as a dedicated nurse at County General Hospital. That's where I met my Robert, back in nursing school in the early 70s. He was studying to be a radiologist, and we bumped into each other in the hospital cafeteria. I spilled coffee all over his white coat, and instead of being upset, he asked me out for a proper cup that wouldn't end up on his uniform. That began our 45-year marriage. A beautiful journey cut short when he passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago. We never lived extravagantly, but Robert was meticulous about financial planning. "We work hard now so we can breathe easy later," he always said. We bought a modest 3-bedroom home in a nice neighborhood, saved diligently, and invested wisely. Nothing flashy, just careful preparation for our future and for our 2 children, William and Margaret. William was always the ambitious one. Even as a child, he had big dreams and the determination to match. He started his own property development business right out of college and has expanded it considerably over the years. Margaret followed my footsteps into caring for others, becoming an elementary school teacher. She has her father's gentle nature and patience. When Robert died, it felt like half of me went with him. For months, I moved through life in a fog, going through motions without truly feeling anything. William was surprisingly supportive during those early days. He visited regularly, helped me organize Robert's affairs, and made sure I understood our financial situation. Robert had left everything well documented, but William insisted on reviewing it all with me. "Dad made sure you'd be comfortable, Mom," he told me, sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by papers. "The house is paid off, you have your pension, Social Security, and your investments. You should be just fine." Looking back, I should have noticed how his eyes lingered on the numbers, how he asked just a few too many questions about the specifics of my accounts. But grief has a way of blinding you to things you might otherwise notice. Over the next 5 years, I watched William change. His visits became less about checking on my well-being, and more about discussing my finances. "Have you thought about selling the house? It's a lot for you to maintain," he'd suggest, though I managed just fine. Or, "Those investment returns could be better if you let me handle them through my business contacts." I always politely declined. William married Stephanie 12 years ago. She was charming and warm at first, calling me Mom, almost immediately and including me in their lives. They blessed me with 2 wonderful grandchildren, Abigail, now 16, and Andrew, 14. But as the years passed after Robert's death, Stephanie's warmth cooled considerably. Her smiles became tight, her invitations less frequent. My grandchildren, though, remained my absolute joy. Abigail is brilliant, already planning for college and a career in medicine. Andrew is our family artist, sensitive and observant, capturing the world through his sketches. I set up education funds for both of them after Robert died, wanting to honor his commitment to their futures. Meanwhile, I built a new life for myself. Widowhood is a club no one wants to join, but once you're in it, you find unexpected strength. I joined a support group at the community center where I met Janet, Phyllis, and Barbara, all women navigating life after losing their husbands. We meet weekly for coffee, take day trips to museums, and check on each other during difficult days like anniversaries and holidays. I also volunteer 3 days a week at the hospital where I used to work, guiding patients and visitors, offering comfort where I can. "You have a gift for calming people," my volunteer coordinator often tells me. Perhaps it comes from understanding profound loss. Throughout this time, William's business grew impressively. He moved his family to an expansive house in Oakwood Estates, the kind of neighborhood with gates and security guards. He drove luxury cars and took lavish vacations. Yet underneath the success, I began noticing signs of strain. Phone conversations where he'd mentioned temporary cash flow issues, or reinvesting everything back into the business. Stephanie's social media showing expensive purchases followed by comments about stretching the budget. Then came the questions about my will. First they were casual. Mom, you should make sure your affairs are in order. Have you updated everything since Dad died? Then more pointed. I was thinking about the house. Have you considered who might want it eventually? And finally, almost demanding. Don't you think we should discuss what you're planning to do with everything? I found it uncomfortable but tried to understand. William had always been focused on financial security, a value Robert and I had instilled in him. Perhaps this was just his way of planning ahead. Still, something felt wrong about his growing preoccupation with my assets. My daughter Margaret noticed it too. He asked me if I knew details about your investments. She told me during one of our weekly phone calls. It felt inappropriate, Mom. He's just concerned about my future. I defended him, though doubt had already taken root in my mind. Little did I know that this doubt would bloom into painful clarity at a family dinner I'll never forget. The invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon. William called, his voice cheerful and energetic. Mom, we're having a special family dinner this Saturday. Nothing formal, just the family. Can you come? Of course, I replied, genuinely pleased. It had been nearly 2 months since I'd seen my grandchildren. Should I bring anything? Just yourself, he said, then added. Actually, your apple pie wouldn't be turned away. The kids have been asking for it. I spent Friday baking, using Robert's favorite recipe. He always claimed my apple pie could end wars and bring world peace. The familiar routine of peeling apples, mixing cinnamon and sugar, and rolling out dough brought back warm memories of family gatherings when the children were young and Robert would sneak extra slices after everyone went to bed. Saturday arrived with perfect spring weather. I dressed carefully in a blue dress Robert had always complimented, applied light makeup, and even put on the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 40th anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I saw a 70-year-old woman with silver hair and smile lines, but also someone who had survived tremendous loss and found her footing again. The drive to William's neighborhood took 30 minutes, carrying me from my modest suburban community to the exclusive Oakwood Estates. The contrast always struck me, my practical 3-bedroom home where we'd raised our children versus William's 6-bedroom mansion with its manicured lawn and circular driveway. Robert would have found it all rather excessive, but he would have been proud of William's success nonetheless. I pulled up behind a sleek black Mercedes I didn't recognize. Perhaps they had company after all. I gathered my purse and the carefully boxed pie, making my way to the imposing front door with its ornate glass panels. Abigail answered my knock, her teenage face lighting up. Grandma! She embraced me warmly, taking the pie box. You made it. Is this the famous apple pie? Andrew's been talking about it all day. Fresh from the oven, I confirmed, following her into the marble-floored entryway. The house always overwhelmed me slightly with its high ceilings and expensive furnishings. Andrew appeared from the family room, headphones around his neck. Grandma's here, he called out, giving me a quick side hug that teenagers specialize in, affectionate but brief. Did you bring your sketchbook to show me your new drawings? I asked him. They're in my room. I'll get them after dinner, he promised. William emerged from his home office, phone in hand. He looked tired despite his smile, with new lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. Mom, glad you could make it. He kissed my cheek and took my coat. Stephanie's finishing up in the kitchen. I followed him through to the expansive kitchen where Stephanie stood at the island, arranging appetizers on a silver platter. She looked up and offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Eleanor, hello. Thanks for coming. No Mom anymore, just Eleanor. Thank you for inviting me. Can I help with anything? I offered. No, everything's under control. We're eating in the dining room tonight. William, can you open the wine? Her tone was clipped, stressed. The children disappeared upstairs while I settled at the kitchen counter, making small talk that felt increasingly forced. William poured wine for everyone, including a glass for me, though he knew I rarely drank more than a few sips these days. Business is really taking off, William announced, leaning against the counter. We're finalizing the purchase of a vacation property in Aspen next week. Great investment opportunity. Plus we'll use it for winter breaks. That sounds lovely, I replied. noting how Stephanie's shoulders tensed at the mention of the purchase. "It's a significant commitment," she said, her voice neutral but her expression concerned. "The market there is only going up," William countered. "We need to move now before we're priced out completely." Before the discussion could continue, Abigail returned and pulled me into the living room to show me college brochures. "I'm thinking about pre-med programs, Grandma. Johns Hopkins is my dream school." "You'd be wonderful as a doctor," I told her sincerely. "Your grandfather would be so proud." "I know the education fund you set up will help," she said. "But these top schools are really expensive. Mom and Dad say we need to be practical about college choices." I patted her hand. "Don't worry about that right now. Focus on your applications and grades. We'll figure out the rest." I'd always intended to supplement the education funds if necessary. Robert and I had agreed that education was the most valuable inheritance we could provide. Andrew showed up with his sketchbook, eager to show me his latest work. His talent had grown remarkably, his pencil sketches capturing emotion and light in ways that impressed me. "These are wonderful," I told him. "Have you thought about art school?" His face clouded slightly. "Dad says art should stay a hobby. He wants me to study business or law." Before I could respond, William appeared in the doorway. "Mom, can I talk to you for a minute before dinner?" He gestured toward his office. I followed him, curious and slightly concerned by his serious expression. The office was intimidating: dark wood, leather furniture, and framed business awards on the walls. William closed the door and sat behind his massive desk rather than next to me, immediately creating a formal atmosphere. "Mom, I wanted to discuss something important with you," he began, steepling his fingers. "The family is entering a period of significant expansion, both personally and in the business. The Aspen property is just the beginning." I nodded, uncertain where this was heading. "I've been thinking about family resources and how we can best support each other during this growth phase," he continued, using business terminology that felt out of place for a family conversation. "To be direct, I believe it would make sense for you to help us financially at this point." The request caught me off guard. "Help you financially? William, I'm already contributing to Abigail and Andrew's education funds." He waved his hand dismissively. "That's for years from now. I'm talking about present opportunities that require capital now. Your house is paid off, your expenses are minimal, and Dad left you well provided for. It makes sense for some of those resources to be put to work for the family's future." I felt a chill despite the room's comfortable temperature. "William, I need to be careful with my finances. I could live another 20 years or more." Of course," he said quickly. "I'm not suggesting anything that would put you at risk, but there's no reason for assets to sit idle when they could be growing for all of us." Before I could respond, Stephanie called that dinner was ready. William stood, effectively ending the conversation. "Just think about it, Mom. Family supporting family. It's what Dad would have wanted." I followed him to the dining room, my mind racing and a heaviness settling in my chest. This didn't feel like family supporting family. It felt like something else entirely. The dining room gleamed under chandelier light. Stephanie had set the table with their formal china and crystal glasses that caught and scattered the light. Fresh flowers formed an elaborate centerpiece, and candles flickered despite the early hour. This was clearly not the casual family dinner William had described. Abigail and Andrew joined us, dressed nicer than typical weekend attire. Everyone took their assigned seats, with William at the head of the table and me positioned between the children. Stephanie brought out the first course, an elegant salad with ingredients I couldn't identify. "So, Grandma," Andrew began, "did Dad tell you I made the honor roll again?" "He didn't." "That's wonderful news," I replied, genuinely proud. "And Abigail was selected for the science symposium," Stephanie added, taking her seat. "Only 3 students from her school were chosen." The conversation flowed pleasantly through the salad course, focusing on the children's accomplishments. I relaxed slightly, wondering if I had misinterpreted William's office conversation. Perhaps this really was just a family dinner. As Stephanie cleared the salad plates and brought out the main course, an elaborate roast with sides arranged artfully on the platter, William tapped his glass with his fork. "I have a bit of an announcement," he said, smiling broadly. As I mentioned to Mom earlier, we've been looking at vacation properties in Aspen. Well, I've made an executive decision and put down a deposit on a 5-bedroom chalet near the main resort. We'll close next month. Stephanie's face registered surprise, though she quickly masked it. That's sooner than we discussed. Strike while the iron is hot, William replied confidently. The opportunity was too good to pass up. It sounds lovely, I said carefully. But I thought you mentioned some cash flow concerns last month when we spoke on the phone. The atmosphere shifted instantly. William's smile tightened. Business has its ups and downs, Mom. That's normal. The important thing is leveraging opportunities when they arise. Of course, I nodded. It just sounded like a significant concern at the time. Stephanie set down her fork. Living within our means has been a discussion point recently, she said, her tone pointed. Some of us believe in building savings before making major purchases. William shot her a warning look. This isn't the time, Stephanie. When is the time? She countered. You make these decisions without full family discussion. I felt uncomfortable witnessing their disagreement, but also concerned about what appeared to be financial strain beneath the surface of luxury. Perhaps I should help more with the grandchildren's education funds if things are tight, I offered. William turned to me, expression changing. That's part of what I wanted to discuss, Mom. You're sitting on substantial wealth that could be benefiting the whole family. At your age, do you really need to keep everything tied up? The bluntness of his question shocked me. I need to ensure I can take care of myself for whatever time I have left, William. But be realistic, he pressed. You're 70. The house alone is worth $400,000 in today's market. Your investments, Dad's insurance money. It's just sitting there while we're building the family's future. I felt blood rush to my face. I'm not ready to discuss selling my home. And my investments are my security. Security for what? William's voice rose slightly. You live a simple life. Your expenses are minimal. Meanwhile, we're creating opportunities for your grandchildren. Andrew and Abigail exchanged uncomfortable glances. Stephanie stared at her plate. I plan to help with their education, I stated firmly. And I've earmarked some funds for causes that were important to your father and me. William's face darkened. Causes? You're giving our family money to strangers. Charitable organizations aren't strangers, I corrected him. The hospital where I worked for 40 years, the Heart Research Foundation after your father's death. This is exactly the problem, William said, setting down his knife with too much force. You're making unilateral decisions about family resources without consulting us. They're not family resources, William. They're my resources, left to me by your father. Which brings me to another point. He continued as if I hadn't spoken. We need to discuss your will and estate planning. As the family financial manager, I should know what arrangements you've made. The audacity of his demand left me momentarily speechless. When I found my voice, it was quieter but firm. My will is private, William. I'm not discussing it at the dinner table. Why the secrecy unless there's something problematic in it? He challenged. We should know what to expect. You should expect that I'll take care of myself while I'm alive and make thoughtful decisions about whatever might be left when I'm gone, I replied, increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of this conversation. That's not good enough, William insisted. We need concrete information for our financial planning. The business, the children's education, the new property. These all require long-term financial strategies. Strategies that should not include counting on an inheritance from me while I'm still very much alive, I pointed out. William's face flushed red. You're being selfish, Mom. After everything we've done for you since Dad died. What exactly have you done for me, William? I asked quietly, genuinely curious about his perception. We've included you in family events, checked on you, made sure you weren't alone, he listed, as if these were extraordinary efforts rather than basic family connections. I appreciate that, I acknowledged. But those are normal family interactions, not financial investments expecting returns. William slammed his hand on the table, causing the glasses to jump and Abigail to flinch. This isn't about returns. This is about family taking care of family. Dad would be ashamed of how you're hoarding what should be supporting all of us. Your father and I worked our entire lives to ensure we wouldn't burden our children in our old age, I responded, fighting to keep my voice steady. He would never have expected me to fund your vacation home. You don't understand modern financial planning, William dismissed. Assets should be working, not sitting idle. My financial security is not sitting idle, I insisted. You're being ridiculous and stubborn. William's voice rose further. At your age, you need to accept that your assets should transition to the next generation who can use them properly. I stood up slowly. I think this conversation has gone far enough. This isn't what I expected when you invited me to a family dinner. That's when it happened. William shot to his feet, face contorted with frustration. Shut up, widow. You don't understand what real families need anymore. The dining room fell into shocked silence. Stephanie's mouth opened slightly. Abigail gasped. Andrew stared at his plate, shoulders hunched. The word widow hung in the air like a slap. Not mom. Not Eleanor. But widow. Reducing me to nothing but my loss, stripping away my identity as mother, grandmother, nurse, volunteer, person. I felt tears prick my eyes but refused to let them fall. Without a word, I placed my napkin beside my plate, picked up my purse, and walked out of the dining room. No one stopped me as I retrieved my coat and left the house, my apple pie still untouched on the kitchen counter. The drive home passed in a blur of hurt and disbelief. My son. My child whom I had carried, nursed, raised, loved unconditionally, had just revealed what he truly thought of me. Not a mother to be respected, but a widow sitting on assets he felt entitled to. The label echoed in my mind as I pulled into my driveway. Widow. As if that one word defined my entire existence now. As if losing Robert had reduced me to nothing but a financial resource to be drained. Inside my home, the home where I had raised William, where Robert and I had built our life together, I finally allowed the tears to fall. I moved through my empty house like a ghost, unable to settle. Every photograph on the walls, every piece of furniture Robert and I had chosen together, seemed to watch me with sad eyes. How had my relationship with my son deteriorated to this point without me fully realizing it? In the kitchen, I made tea in the ceramic mug William had made in second grade, the lopsided one with "World's Best Mom," painted in childish letters. I traced the words with my fingertip, remembering the proud smile on his 7-year-old face when he presented it to me. Where had that sweet boy gone? Memories flooded back as I wandered from room to room. William taking his first steps across this very living room, arms outstretched toward me. Teaching him to ride a bicycle in the driveway, Robert running alongside to catch him if he fell. Staying up all night when he had chickenpox at age 8. Applying calamine lotion and reading stories until he finally drifted to sleep. The pride I felt at his high school graduation, college acceptance, business launch. So many sacrifices we had made for him. The vacations Robert and I skipped to pay for summer camps and sports equipment. The extra shifts I took to help with college tuition. The countless hours spent driving to activities, helping with homework, nurturing his dreams. I found myself in William's old bedroom, now a guest room but still containing a box of his childhood keepsakes I'd preserved. Inside were report cards, art projects, the tiny baseball cap from his first Little League game. Had I somehow failed in raising him? Had we given him too much or too little? What turns a child into an adult who would speak to his mother that way? Sleep eluded me completely. At 2 a.m, I called Margaret. She answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep but immediately alert when she heard my tone. Mom, what's wrong? I recounted the evening's events, my voice breaking when I reached William's outburst. He called you what? Margaret's outrage blazed through the phone. That's absolutely unacceptable. I'm calling him right now. No, please don't, I requested. This is between William and me. I need to handle it myself. But Mom, you shouldn't have to deal with this alone. I'm coming over tomorrow. I appreciate that, sweetheart, but I need to think clearly tonight. I'll call you tomorrow after I've decided what to do. After hanging up, I made more tea and settled at the kitchen table with a notepad. I began writing down every interaction with William over the past 5 years since Robert died, focusing on discussions about money, my home, or my will. The pattern emerged clearly on paper. A gradual but unmistakable shift from concern for my well-being to interest in my assets. The subtle suggestions about selling my house. The offers to manage my investments. The questions about my will. The complaints about business challenges followed by purchases of luxury items. It hadn't happened overnight, but rather in such small increments that I'd missed the complete picture. As dawn broke, casting pale light through the kitchen windows, I reached a painful conclusion. William no longer valued me as his mother, but rather as a potential financial resource. The realization broke my heart, but also ignited something I hadn't felt in years: righteous anger. Robert would have been furious. My gentle husband rarely lost his temper, but disrespect toward family was one thing he would never tolerate. Family is sacred, he always said. Money comes and goes, but how you treat your family defines who you are. With morning light came clarity. William needed to learn a lesson that should have been absorbed years ago. Sometimes love means setting boundaries and allowing consequences. I had raised him to be better than this, and my enabling his entitled behavior wasn't helping him become the man his father and I had hoped he would be. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Frank Patterson, who had handled our affairs for 30 years. His secretary scheduled an emergency appointment for 9 o'clock. Next, I called Janet from my widow support group. Can I stay with you for a few days? I need some space to think. Of course, she answered without hesitation. The guest room is yours for as long as you need it. By 8 o'clock, I had showered and dressed with unusual care, selecting an outfit Robert had always complimented and the pearl earrings he gave me on our 25th anniversary. Whatever happened next, I would face it with dignity. I spent the morning implementing the plan that had formed during my sleepless night. At the lawyer's office, I revised my will completely. At the bank, I reorganized my accounts. At my financial advisor's office, I established new trusts with specific conditions. Each step was painful but necessary. By afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table writing the most difficult letter of my life. Words of hurt, disappointment, and consequences flowed onto the page. I rewrote it 3 times, removing anger and emotion until only clear, firm statements remained. This wasn't about punishment, but about necessary lessons and boundaries. The final task was the hardest, packing a suitcase with enough clothes and essentials for an extended absence from my home. As I folded sweaters and selected toiletries, I felt as though I were dismantling my life. In a way, perhaps I was dismantling one version to make room for another. Robert's photograph watched from the bedside table. Am I doing the right thing? I asked him aloud, a habit I'd developed over 5 years of widowhood. The silent house offered no answer, but in my heart, I felt a certainty that this painful path was necessary. Before leaving, I called William's cell phone, relieved when it went to voicemail. William, this is Mom. I'll be stopping by your house this afternoon around 4. I need to drop something off. Please make sure you're home. Simple, direct, no hint of the earthquake I was about to cause. As I drove away from my home, the suitcase in my trunk and the sealed letter on the passenger seat felt like symbols of an ending and a beginning. The grief was profound, but underneath it ran a current of determination. Sometimes love requires difficult choices. The morning after that disastrous dinner, I woke with a strange sense of calm. The hurt remained, a dull ache beneath my breastbone, but clarity had replaced confusion. The path forward was painful but necessary. I began methodically packing a suitcase, enough clothes for 2 weeks, medications, toiletries, and a few precious photographs, including one of Robert in his garden and our family portrait from our 40th anniversary. I added the small wooden box containing Robert's wedding ring and the love letters he'd written during our courtship. These treasures of my heart would not be left behind. After breakfast, I called Janet. Is your offer of the guest room still open? I asked. Absolutely, she replied without hesitation. For as long as you need. When will you arrive? Late afternoon if that works. I have several stops to make first. I'll have fresh sheets on the bed and dinner ready, she promised. Janet understood loss and difficult family situations all too well after her own experiences with her daughter's substance abuse issues. My next call was to my bank, where I'd been a customer for 45 years. Mrs. Henderson, we can certainly fit you in at 11, the manager assured me when I explained I needed to discuss account changes. The financial advisor Robert and I had worked with for decades made time at 1:30. Anything for you, Eleanor. Robert would haunt me if I didn't take care of you properly, Martin joked gently. Before leaving home, I sat at the kitchen table and began writing the letter that would change everything. The words came slowly at first, then in a flood of hurt, disappointment, and ultimately, resolve. Dear William, I wrote. Last night, you showed me clearly how you view me, not as your mother who loves you unconditionally, but as a widow sitting on assets you feel entitled to access. That revelation has forced me to reconsider many things, including our relationship and my financial plans. I detailed the history of our interactions since Robert's death, pointing out the pattern I'd been too blind to see. I explained the new arrangements I was making and why. The letter ran 4 pages, each word carefully chosen to convey not anger, but sad determination. I sealed it in an envelope with William's name written in my steady handwriting. Then I gathered my purse, suitcase, and the letter, taking one last look around my home before locking the door behind me. At the bank, Manager Thomas welcomed me into his office. What can we do for you today, Mrs. Henderson? I need to make several changes to my accounts, I explained. First, I want to remove my son William as a signatory on my safety deposit box, and as the emergency contact on my accounts. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded professionally. And who would you like to designate instead? My daughter, Margaret Wilson, I replied, providing her information. Next came the financial advisor's office, where I implemented the most significant changes. Martin, I need to restructure my investments and create some specific trusts, I began. By 3:30, I had established 2 educational trusts for my grandchildren that could not be accessed by their parents under any circumstances. The funds would go directly to accredited educational institutions and housing expenses during college years, with strict conditions that William could not circumvent. I also transferred a significant portion of my investments into a charitable remainder trust, benefiting the cardiac care wing at County General Hospital, where Robert had died. The remainder of my estate would now be divided quite differently than originally planned. At 4 o'clock precisely, I pulled into William's driveway. I'd timed my visit carefully, knowing Stephanie would be picking up the children from their afternoon activities. This conversation needed to be between William and me alone. He opened the door looking surprised to see me so soon after the previous night's disaster. Mom, I didn't expect. Come in. I remained on the porch. I won't be staying, William. I just came to give you this. I held out the sealed envelope. What is it? He asked, not taking it immediately. A letter explaining some decisions I've made. I'd prefer you read it after I leave. He took the envelope reluctantly. About last night. I was stressed and said things I didn't mean. Business has been challenging lately, and I took it out on you unfairly. This isn't about what you said, William. It's about what you revealed. I kept my voice steady despite the ache in my throat. What you called me, widow, that wasn't a momentary lapse. That's how you see me now. Not as your mother, but as Robert's widow with assets you feel entitled to. Mom, that's not fair. It was one stupid comment during an argument. I shook my head. It was the truth slipping out after years of careful calculation. I've reviewed our interactions since your father died. The pattern is clear. What pattern? I've been looking out for you. His defensive tone confirmed my suspicions. You can tell yourself that if it helps you sleep at night, I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. But we both know what's been happening. Read the letter, William. It explains everything. I turned to leave. Where are you going? He called after me, confusion replacing defensiveness. I'm staying with a friend for a while. I need some space to think. Mom, this is ridiculous. Come inside. We can talk about this. I paused at my car door. We're beyond talking right now, William. Actions have consequences. Read the letter. I drove away with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, grief and resolution battling within me. In my rearview mirror, I could see William standing in his doorway, the unopened letter in his hand. Janet welcomed me with a warm hug and no intrusive questions when I arrived at her comfortable condominium. The guest room is ready, and there's soup simmering on the stove. Whenever you want to talk, I'm here. I unpacked my suitcase in the cheerful yellow guest room, placing Robert's photograph on the nightstand. Phase 1 complete, I whispered to his smiling image. The hardest part was yet to come. That evening, my phone began ringing repeatedly, William calling every 15 minutes. I let each call go to voicemail, not yet ready for that conversation. Stephanie called twice, leaving increasingly angry messages. How could you do this? William is devastated. You need to call us immediately. Around 9 o'clock, Margaret called. Mom, William just called me in a complete panic. What's happening? I made some necessary changes, I explained, recounting my day's activities and the contents of the letter. Oh my God, Margaret breathed. You actually did it. You rewrote your will and cut him out. Not completely, I clarified. He'll receive personal items of sentimental value. But yes, the financial aspects have changed significantly. The house will go to you, with the provision that I can live in it for the remainder of my life. The grandchildren have protected education trusts. A large portion will go to cardiac care research. He's going to fight this, Margaret warned. He can try, I acknowledged. But Frank assures me everything is legally sound. And if William contests it, he'll lose even the personal items I've left for him. Margaret was quiet for a moment. I'm proud of you, Mom. That couldn't have been easy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, I admitted, tears finally spilling. Harder than losing your father. At least then, I didn't choose the loss. As I settled into bed in Janet's guest room, my phone buzzed with a text from William. You can't do this. We need to talk immediately. I turned off my phone and closed my eyes, emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter. Tomorrow would bring more storms, but tonight, I had taken back my power. The next morning, I awoke to 17 missed calls and 23 text messages on my phone. Most were from William, growing increasingly desperate through the night. 3 were from Stephanie, alternating between anger and attempts at reconciliation. 1 was from Margaret, simply checking that I was okay. Janet had coffee waiting when I emerged from the guest room. Rough night? She asked, noticing my expression as I scrolled through the messages. William, read the letter, I confirmed, showing her the most recent text. Mom, please call me. We need to fix this. I'll do anything. What exactly did you tell him? Janet asked, pouring me a cup of strong coffee. I summarized the contents of my letter to William. I had explained that his words at dinner had forced me to recognize how he truly viewed me, as a financial resource rather than his mother. I detailed how I had revised my will completely. William would receive only items of personal significance like photographs and small keepsakes. The house would go to Margaret with provisions allowing me lifetime residence. Most significantly, I had created irrevocable trusts for Abigail and Andrew's education that William could not access or control, and donated a substantial portion of my estate to cardiac research at County General. The most difficult part, I told Janet, was explaining that this wasn't about punishment, but about protecting myself and the true values Robert and I had tried to instill in our children. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang with Margaret's number. Mom, I thought you should know that William showed up at my house this morning. He's absolutely frantic. What did he want? I asked, though I could guess. Information about where you are, mainly. And he wanted me to talk to you about undoing whatever you did yesterday. His words, not mine. He was in such a state that Paul had to ask him to leave when he started shouting. Paul, Margaret's husband, was the calmest person I knew. If he had intervened, William must have been truly out of control. I'm sorry you were put in that position, I told her. Don't apologize. This isn't your fault. Margaret paused. He mentioned something about the Aspen property falling through if he can't secure additional funding this week. I think he was counting on your money, Mom. The realization sent a chill through me. Had William invited me to dinner specifically to ask for money for the vacation home? Had the entire evening been a calculated attempt to access my savings? By afternoon, William had escalated to leaving voice messages that swung between apologetic and accusatory. Mom, I said one thoughtless thing in a moment of frustration. This response is completely disproportionate. Then, you're destroying this family over a single comment. Is that really what Dad would have wanted? I let them all go to voicemail, not yet ready for direct conversation. The emotional manipulation in his messages only confirmed I had made the right decision. On the third day of my stay with Janet, an unexpected visitor arrived. Abigail stood on the porch, looking nervous but determined when I answered the door. "Grandma," she said, her voice small. "Can we talk?" I ushered her in concerned. "Does your father know you're here?" She shook her head. "I took an Uber. I saved the address from Christmas cards you sent." She twisted her hands anxiously. "Everything's awful at home. Dad and Mom are fighting constantly. He's locked himself in his office making phone calls about loans and refinancing. I heard him say something about the business being overextended." My heart ached for her. "I'm so sorry you're caught in the middle of this, sweetheart. Dad told us you changed your will because you're angry at him." Her direct gaze questioned me. "It's more complicated than that," I explained carefully. "Your father and I have different views about family relationships and financial responsibilities. But none of this affects how much I love you and Andrew." "He said our college funds are gone," she continued, her voice wavering. "That's not true," I assured her. "I've actually secured your education funds more firmly. They're in special trusts now that will pay directly to whatever colleges you and Andrew choose to attend." Relief washed over her face. "Really? Dad made it sound like you'd cut us all off completely." "Never," I promised. "You and Andrew are innocent in this situation. I would never punish you for adult disagreements." Abigail stayed for nearly an hour, confiding her worries and fears. Before she left, she hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry for what Dad said to you. It was horrible." "Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot to me." 2 days later, Andrew called. Unlike his sister, he didn't ask to visit but wanted to make sure I was okay. "What Dad said was really messed up, Grandma. I wanted you to know I don't think of you that way." "I know you don't, Andrew. This situation is between your father and me." "He's really stressed about money now," Andrew confided. "I heard him telling Mom they might have to sell the boat and her car." A week after I left William's house, a thick envelope arrived at Janet's condo. Inside was a 12-page handwritten letter from William. The handwriting grew increasingly uneven as the pages progressed, revealing his emotional state as he wrote. He began with profuse apologies for his inexcusable comment, and assured me he didn't think of me as just a widow. He explained the tremendous pressure he'd been under with the business expansion and the Aspen property commitment. By page 4, the tone shifted to explaining his financial situation in detail. He had leveraged the business significantly for expansion, counting on continued growth that hadn't materialized as quickly as projected. The Aspen property required a larger down payment than anticipated, and he had already committed non-refundable earnest money. Pages 7 through 10 outlined how my sudden and drastic action had created a crisis for the entire family. Without the financial support he had reasonably anticipated from me, he faced potential business setbacks that would affect everyone, including the grandchildren's future prospects. The final pages were a direct appeal. If I would reconsider my decision and provide a loan of $200,000, he would make amends in whatever way I deemed appropriate. He ended with, "I know I've taken you for granted, Mom. Please give me the chance to make this right." I read the letter twice, noting what was missing. Any acknowledgement of the pattern of behavior leading up to the dinner incident, any recognition that he had been planning to use my money all along, any understanding that family relationships shouldn't be transactional. My response was brief and clear. "William, I understand you're facing financial challenges. However, those challenges don't obligate me to provide funding. The trusts for Abigail and Andrew's education are secure and will fulfill my promise to help with their college expenses. Beyond that, I suggest consulting a financial advisor about restructuring your business debts. Love, Mom." 3 weeks after moving to Janet's guest room, I found a small apartment to rent. It wasn't my plan to sell my house, but I needed neutral space while the family situation evolved. Margaret helped me move essential items and set up the new place. "William came by my house again," she told me as we arranged my books on new shelves. "He's had to back out of the Aspen property, lost the earnest money, and he's trying to find investors for the business because the bank won't extend his credit line." I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. Despite everything, he was still my son, and his pain didn't bring me joy. Don't be sorry, Margaret replied firmly. He created this situation by overextending himself and assuming he could tap into your savings whenever he needed. This is a necessary lesson, Mom. In the second month after the confrontation, I received an unexpected call from Stephanie. Her tone lacked the anger of earlier messages. Eleanor, I feel I should apologize for my part in all this, she began. Things have been difficult between William and me for some time, especially regarding finances. He's been making increasingly risky business decisions, and when I questioned them, he would assure me that there was a safety net. Me, I realized aloud. I was the safety net. Yes, she admitted. He spoke as if your resources were eventually going to solve any problems. I should have challenged that assumption more strongly. What's happening now? I asked, genuinely concerned. We've had to make significant lifestyle changes. The vacation property fell through completely. William had to bring in partners for the business, diluting his ownership. We're selling the house and moving to something more modest. She paused. It's actually somewhat of a relief, to be honest. Living beyond our means was creating constant tension. 2.5 months after the dinner incident, William requested a meeting at a coffee shop halfway between our locations. After consulting with Margaret and Janet, I agreed. He looked different when I arrived, thinner, with shadows under his eyes and less expensive clothing. He stood when I approached the table, an unexpected gesture of respect. Mom, he said simply, voice thick with emotion. I sat across from him, ordering tea from the waitress before speaking. Hello, William. Thank you for coming, he began. I've been trying to find the right words for weeks. Perhaps start with honest ones, I suggested. He nodded slowly. I've lost nearly everything over the past months. The Aspen property, majority control of my business, our house, our savings. We're moving next week to a 3-bedroom in Lakeside Gardens. I knew the neighborhood pleasant but far from the luxury of Oakwood Estates. But losing things isn't what matters, he continued, surprising me. I lost your trust and respect. That's what keeps me awake at night. I watched him carefully, looking for signs of manipulation. I saw only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine remorse. What happened at dinner? He hesitated. It wasn't just a momentary lapse. You were right in your letter. I had begun thinking of you as a financial resource rather than my mother. Somehow over the years I convinced myself that what Dad left you was really meant for all of us, that you were just holding it. A caretaker rather than an owner, I supplied. Yes. He looked down at his coffee. I planned that dinner specifically to ask you for money for the Aspen property. When you questioned it, all my frustration about my financial overextension came out. It was absolutely inexcusable. For the first time since that terrible night, I felt a small easing of the knot in my chest. This acknowledgement was what I had needed to hear. The past months have been a harsh awakening, William continued, but maybe a necessary one. I've had to face that I built my business and lifestyle on unsustainable expectations, including expectations about your money. We talked for nearly 2 hours. He explained the restructuring of his business, the downsizing of their lifestyle, and most importantly, the personal reflection he'd been forced to undertake. I don't expect you to change your will back, he said toward the end of our conversation. I forfeited that right, but I hope we can begin rebuilding our relationship, even if it's just small steps at first. As I drove home, I felt the first stirrings of what might eventually become forgiveness. Not because William had suffered financial consequences, but because he seemed to truly understand the deeper issue, that he had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a means to an end. That night I called my lawyer. Frank, I'd like to make one amendment to my will. I don't want to restore William as a primary beneficiary, but I'd like to include a small trust that would help him if he ever faced true financial hardship, medical emergencies, housing insecurity, that sort of thing. With strict conditions that it can't be used for business ventures or luxury purchases. A safety net, not a windfall, Frank summarized. Exactly. Because no matter what's happened, he's still my son. 3 months after that fateful dinner, I settled into my new rhythm of life. The small apartment I rented was cozy and manageable, within walking distance of a lovely park and my favorite bookstore. Though I planned to eventually return to my home, this neutral space gave me the distance needed for healing. My widow support group became even more important during this time. Janet, Phyllis, Barbara, and the others listened without judgment as I processed the complex emotions of family estrangement. "You did what many of us wish we had the courage to do," Barbara told me one afternoon. "You stood up for yourself when it would have been easier to give in." I resumed my volunteer work at County General, finding comfort in helping others navigate their own difficult moments. The familiar hospital corridors where I'd spent 40 years as a nurse welcomed me back like an old friend. Occasionally, I visited the cardiac care wing that would someday bear Robert's name thanks to the trust I'd established. Margaret and her family visited regularly, bringing homemade meals and updates on their lives. She never pressured me about William, allowing me to navigate that complicated relationship at my own pace. The grandchildren maintained contact independently from their parents. Abigail called weekly with updates on college applications and school activities. Andrew occasionally sent text messages with photos of his latest artwork. I cherished these connections, relieved that the adult conflict hadn't severed these precious bonds. William made consistent, respectful efforts to rebuild our relationship. He began with short, considerate text messages, never demanding responses, simply letting me know he was thinking of me. "Saw the first cardinal of spring today, and remembered how you always pointed them out to me as a child." Or found Dad's old records in the moving boxes. "Remember how he played Frank Sinatra every Sunday morning." After several weeks, these evolved into occasional phone calls where he shared updates about the family's adjustment to their new circumstances. They had indeed moved to the more modest home in Lakeside Gardens. Stephanie had returned to her former career as an interior designer to supplement their income. The children were adapting surprisingly well to the lifestyle changes. "Andrew seems happier, actually," William confided during one call. "There's less pressure in the new environment. And he's joined an art club at the community center." At the 3-month mark, William asked if we could establish a regular meeting. "Nothing formal, just coffee every other Sunday, if you're comfortable with that." I agreed, and we began meeting at a small cafe midway between our homes. Those early conversations were sometimes awkward, sometimes painful, but increasingly genuine. William spoke candidly about the financial reckoning he'd faced. "The business is actually healthier now with the partners involved," he admitted during our 4th meeting. "They brought experience and perspective I was missing. We're growing more sustainably." "And personally?" I asked carefully. He considered the question seriously. "It's been humbling. Necessary but difficult. Stephanie and I are in counseling. We've had to confront some hard truths about our values and expectations. During these conversations, I never mentioned my will or financial matters. This boundary seemed important to maintain, and William respected it completely. Our interactions gradually shifted from strained politeness to cautious warmth, and occasionally, glimpses of the genuine mother-son relationship we once had. For months after the confrontation, I invited Andrew and Abigail to my apartment for lunch without their parents. They arrived with a homemade card and flowers. "We wanted to thank you for protecting our college funds," Abigail explained. "I got accepted to Johns Hopkins pre-med program with a partial scholarship. Between that and the trust you set up, I can actually go." Andrew, typically more reserved, added, "Dad told us what you did was because you love us and want us to be secure, not because you were angry at him." This simple statement revealed more about William's growth than anything else. That he would explain my actions to his children as protective rather than punitive showed genuine understanding. 5 months into our new reality, William invited me to dinner at their new home. A modest but comfortable house with a small garden that Stephanie was cultivating with unexpected enthusiasm. "No agenda," he assured me when extending the invitation. "Just family dinner. The kids miss having you over." I accepted with some trepidation, memories of the last family dinner still painfully fresh. Stephanie greeted me with a genuine hug when I arrived, the first warm exchange between us in years. "Welcome, Eleanor," she said, using my name but with none of the former coldness. "Thank you for coming." The house was dramatically different from their former mansion's simple furnishings, family photographs instead of expensive art, bookshelves filled with well-read volumes. It felt more like a home than a showcase. Dinner was served on everyday dishes instead of formal china. The conversation flowed naturally around the children's activities, books everyone was reading, and Stephanie's rejuvenated design career. Not once did finances or inheritance enter the discussion. After dessert, William asked if I would join him in the backyard. We sat on simple garden chairs overlooking the small but thoughtfully planted space. "I want to say something I should have said months ago," he began. "Thank you." I looked at him puzzled. For what? For the wake-up call I desperately needed. He gazed at the evening sky. I was becoming someone Dad would have been ashamed of. Someone I'm ashamed of. Entitled, materialistic, valuing things over relationships. It wasn't easy for either of us, I acknowledged. The hardest part was realizing you were right. I had stopped seeing you as my mother and started seeing you as a financial solution to problems I created. He met my eyes directly.
"I'm deeply sorry, Mom."
Not just for what I said that night, but for the years of calculating behavior before it. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within me. This wasn't the defensive apology of someone wanting to regain financial favor. This was genuine remorse and recognition. "I forgive you, William," I said quietly. The words felt right as they left my lips. By the 6-month mark, a new pattern had established itself. Sunday dinners at William and Stephanie's house every other week. Coffee with William on alternate Sundays. Regular visits with the grandchildren. A cautious but growing reconnection with my son. During this time, I maintained my independence and boundaries. I never offered financial assistance for their lifestyle adjustment, though I did send appropriate gifts for birthdays and celebrations. The separation between our personal relationship and financial matters remained clear and respected by all. 7 months after the confrontation, I made a decision. After consulting with Margaret and my lawyer, I modified my will again. William would not return as a primary beneficiary, but I established a more generous trust for him than the emergency fund I had previously created. This trust included specific conditions reflecting the values Robert and I had always tried to instill: education, compassion, family support. I didn't tell William about this change. The relationship we were rebuilding needed to stand on its own without financial considerations. At Thanksgiving, our first major holiday since the confrontation, I hosted the entire family at my apartment. It was crowded but wonderfully warm. William arrived early to help me prepare, working beside me in the kitchen as he had as a child. As we chopped vegetables for stuffing, he said, "I found something while unpacking some old boxes last week." He pulled a small, worn envelope from his pocket. "It's the card you and Dad gave me when I started my business." I had forgotten all about it. I remembered that card. Robert had written a heartfelt message about values being more important than profit, about integrity outlasting any financial success. "Dad's words hit differently now," William said quietly. "I wish I had really heard them back then." "He would be proud of your growth these past months," I told him sincerely. "The business setbacks would have concerned him far less than seeing you become the man you're working to be now." When the family gathered around my modest table that evening, I looked at the faces of those I loved most in the world. Margaret and her husband Paul, William and Stephanie, Abigail and Andrew. We had weathered a painful storm, but the family bond, though tested, had ultimately strengthened. As we prepared to eat, William stood unexpectedly. "I'd like to say something." He took a deep breath. "This past year has taught me what truly matters. Not the size of our house or the success of my business, but the strength of our family. Mom," he turned to me, "thank you for having the courage to teach me that lesson, even when it was incredibly painful for both of us." The meal that followed was the warmest family gathering we had experienced in years. Later, as everyone helped clean up, I found myself standing beside the window, watching the family I loved working together in harmony. Robert's absence still ached, especially during holidays, but I felt his presence in the values that had ultimately prevailed. Sometimes love requires difficult choices. Sometimes healing comes only after necessary pain. And sometimes the strongest family bonds are those that have been broken and carefully, intentionally mended. I realized that I had found peace with my decision, not because William had suffered consequences, but because those consequences had helped him rediscover what truly mattered. The label widow no longer felt like a diminishment of my identity, but simply one aspect of my rich and meaningful life. What do you think about standing up for yourself even when it means facing painful family conflict? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with loved ones? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up. And remember, sometimes the most loving thing we can do for family is hold them accountable, even when it breaks our hearts. Thank you for listening to my story today, and may you find the courage to honor your own worth in all your relationships.